the next two sessions, and I couldn't be any more excited about them in terms of the people who are joining us today. And I'll start with our Director of Broadband Development for Vantage Point Solution, Lori Sherwood. I know Lori's boss, the owner of the company, and I'll tell you that Larry is a member of the Broadband Advisory Group at the FCC. Their company is out of South Dakota, but Lori is one of those telecommuters because she spends more time on a plane and that she lives in Colorado. So she flew in last night just to be with you folks this afternoon. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background, just so you know the amount of knowledge and expertise that she brings to her job. She has worked in broadband and telecom in the municipal space for over 15 years. She was also of counsel in a Denver law firm specializing in local governments, information technology, telecommunication, community broadband networks, legislation, lobbying, and federal affairs. That pretty much covers the gamut of the folks that are here, I think. Prior to that, Lori worked for the Howard County, Maryland, as the first cable administrator and then as the broadband program director for the nationally recognized One Maryland Inter-County Broadband Network, with an initiative of over $100 million in broadband stimulus funds. She is a nationally recognized leader in telecom broadband policy and a current member of the board of directors for the National Association of Telecommunication Officers and Advisors. She is a friend of mine, and so I play those friendship chips quite often, Mark, in talking to she and Larry, and I cannot tell you how pleased and delighted I am, because financing networks, how do we pay for it, ladies and gentlemen? There are going to be no easy answers, and we're going to take that discussion further in the next conversation on partnerships. But right now, I want you to see how this expert does a financial plan. Join me in welcoming to Eastern Kentucky, Lori Sherwood.
I'm not Lori.
Thank God. Thank you for being here.
Wow, thank you, Hilda, for that amazing introduction. We could all have introductions like that when we walked into a room. That would be fantastic. I am the Director of Broadband Development for Vantage Point Solutions, and I do live in Colorado. I'm one of those lucky people who, when I realized that I was going to be working from home, I decided I wanted to work where I wanted to live. And so I moved. I was in the D.C. area for 25 years, and the congestion and the traffic and everything drove me out, and I went west for open pastures. So haven't regretted it since, but it's a delight to be here in Eastern Kentucky with you all today. And hopefully this will work. So just a obligatory slide about our company, what we do. We are a telecom engineering and consulting company. We have over 200 people in our company that are employees, and we actually have employees that live in 26 states. One of our employees, Farley Davis, is here with us today as well. And we have three primary divisions. We have a large consulting division for a company of this size. We have over 20 people that I work with on the consulting side. And then we have engineers, we have outside plant specialists, field technicians, and the like. So where are we today? So basically, the first thing anyone wants to know when they start talking about a financial plan, it's this, right? Show me the money. Where am I going to get the money? How much is this going to cost me? Well, that's the first question everyone asks, but it's really not the first question you answer. So financial planning for broadband really covers 5 main things, and it starts way before you think it does. It's not just in the development of a business plan that is really what financial planning is about. You're talking about doing elements of this in a feasibility study, in the market demand survey, in a business plan, then the funding and the financing and the execution. And all of these elements work together in really the execution of your financial plan. So feasibility studies, and the question that you have is, why should we start with a feasibility study? If we're a municipality, if we're a company, why do we have to do a feasibility study? It's really to answer 3 primary questions. Should we do this? Can we do this? And how do we do this? And those are 3 critical questions. And a feasibility process a feasibility study really can mean different things to different people. So we want to talk about what a feasibility study should include. For municipalities, one of the critical elements here is stakeholder outreach. How many folks here are from municipalities, local governments, towns, cities? So quite a few. So oftentimes you get RFPs out on the street for scope of work that's looking into a feasibility study, and sometimes they have stakeholder outreach and sometimes they don't. And this is actually one of the more critical things that you can do as part of your initial feasibility. One, it's to meet with potential stakeholders, and by that, I'm talking about schools, libraries, your community anchor institutions, talking about other folks that may have access to resources, assets, and funding that you do not have in your town. So the stakeholder outreach part is very important. It's also outreaching to the community as well to obtain feedback and information from citizens, from residents, from businesses, which some of that will be covered in the market demand survey, which we'll get to in a minute, but it's really having that conversation and starting it to help determine what your needs are. Second thing is looking at the regional opportunities for coordination. You know, we are beyond the days of looking at siloed networks. We want to make sure that we have assets that we can potentially leverage, that we can work across borders for infrastructure, because does not stop at, as we know, it does not stop at the town border, the county border. So looking at that regional coordination is something that's important, not just for municipalities, but for companies as well. What is your neighbor doing in the neighboring county? Can you work together on something? Next step is really the key piece of the feasibility study, which is refining your model. For municipalities, it's talking, are you looking at doing a last mile, middle mile network? Are you going to be doing this yourself and self-provisioning it? Are you looking to do a public-private partnership? How are you going to be doing the network? And getting back to those three questions, can we do this? How do we do this? Should we do this? This is what that answers. And depending on what model and what you land on, that will dictate your business plan. So you want to make sure to answer these questions before you go to the steps of doing a business plan, because you only want to do that once. Provider engagement. This is something that is often overlooked. In the early stages of a feasibility study, that should not be. It's actually a very critical thing. Communities looking to help define their model should be talking to providers in the community, not just the big cable companies, but we're talking about you all here in the audience as well. The small telcos, the small companies, anyone who's a provider. We've actually worked with a community down in Texas where the town there found a neighboring wireless provider that wanted to get into the fiber business. They forged a public-private partnership. The town is actually financing the cost of the last mile infrastructure, and the wireless ISP is going to become their fiber service provider for the town. And so that's kind of thinking outside the box. They went and they talked and they did a canvas of the providers in the area, and they found one that was interested in working with them. And now they've created this great new project for them. So that's something that's really important, and we'll get to another reason why in a moment. So the market demand study. This is something that a lot of times people skimp on. And it's something that, you know, oh, let's just take an informal survey, let's just get some informal feedback, let's put a page up on a website and see what happens. And quite frankly, your demand survey results can make or break you and regarding your take rates, obviously. You want to know, you want to be able to measure your customer satisfaction. You want to be able to survey what your customers are currently paying for service. You want to understand what their service is that they're currently getting and where they are getting it. You want to know if a new provider is to come into the market, what's the willingness of some of these customers to switch providers? And what is their willingness to pay? You know, what price point is the sweet spot for this community? Can you do an initial hookup fee to help pay for the cost? Obviously, putting in new wires is costly. Well, can you help defray that cost by charging some kind of hookup fee? All of these things are very important for the demand study, and they're really important for defining the various elements of your business plan. And of course, we come to the take rates. So take rates are something that we all talk about. What is a subscription level? How are we going to make this network work from a financial standpoint, right? What is that take rate? Well, the issue with take rates is that they don't account for all variables. And what I mean by that is there can be 2 years or more from the time that you issue your market demand survey to the time when your network is deployed and you're ready to bring on that first customer. So what can happen in that meantime? Well, when the road to market looks like this and you can't get that network up and running as fast as you think you can create delays, can cause issues, can allow for other providers to enter the market, it can skew your take rate data. And of course, what we see a lot happening in communities where there are existing providers, you have a fire sale. Right? Your competitors who don't have to do the capital infrastructure that you have to do to deploy in the same area have decided to lower prices. And so what does that do to your analysis? If you're testing in a demand study on a particular take rate, willingness to switch and price point, if your competitors start lowering their prices all of a sudden, what does that mean for your analysis? So basically, one of the things that can really derail a project is feasibility process that isn't quite as good as it should be. So I have a beagle puppy. This is not my puppy, but it could be. I could see him doing that. But basically, I want to talk to you first about the 5 mistakes that are made in the feasibility process that really can impact your financial bottom line. And when you're putting together a business plan, these are all critical things to keep in mind. Skimping on a market demand survey. I mentioned this a moment ago. You want to save some cost. You know, a professional firm perhaps takes $15,000, $20,000 to do a demand survey. You think you can skimp on it and do it for less than 10. You have somebody who can put up a web page, take in some comment. Saving $10,000 in a demand survey can cost you much more than that down the road if your data is not right. Now, this is in here because there are often where you have towns, you have counties, you have states where there's referendum votes, where broadband is on the ballot. And a lot of times elected officials get very excited about referendum votes, and they use the vote totals to show that there's a need in their community. Well, there's an interest in broadband, but a referendum vote does not indicate a take rate. So you cannot substitute a referendum vote for a market demand survey. Consider an all or nothing model. So this is something that we see a lot in municipalities where you're looking at doing broadband and everyone wants to do fiber to the home. You're looking at what Chattanooga did, you're looking at what Lafayette, Louisiana did, and you think, well, geez, you know, we want to do that. And then you do the feasibility study and the analysis, and it comes back that, for example, I'll use this city of San Francisco as an example, although it's not really a good example because they're moving forward with the project. But their study came back that it's going to cost them $1.9 billion to do fiber to the home in San Francisco, and they are moving forward with that. Now, that would gives a lot of us sticker shock. That's a lot of money. I can't quite comprehend that, but there's a lot of shades of gray. And here in Kentucky, you know better than anyone, with a middle mile network that's coming down the pike, there's a lot of models between full fiber to the home and doing nothing. And so a feasibility study should look at all of those things. Focusing on things that don't move the ball forward. This is one of my favorite ones. A lot of times you see an RFP come out for a feasibility study, and it's chock full of stuff that's really not worth spending the money on in this part of the process. It's good information to have. It's background information. It's anecdotal information sometimes, but it doesn't move the ball forward in the end. And there's a fascination with a lot of folks with mapping existing incumbent provider assets. And you see that time and time again. And communities actually put up money to try and have a consultant map those assets for you, which are very difficult to do. I mean, you look at what the National Broadband Map tried to do with mapping assets. It's a difficult thing. It's confidential and proprietary information. And spending a lot of time trying to figure out where incumbent provider assets are is really kind of just spinning in circles. So that's just kind of one example of the things that you can that can really slow down your feasibility process. And the last one is completing the business plan prematurely. And the issue here is that if you're still considering what model to do, you don't want to have to do the business plan twice. You don't want to have to do a business plan on a fiber to the home model and then a full business plan on a middle mile network. You want to have to do it only one time. A phased-in approach is really the way to approach business and financial planning. So starting with the feasibility study, and you're gathering the little pieces of information that you're going to need to make sure that your business plan is accurate and that you only have to do it one time. Okay, so here are some reasons why business plans are, premature business plans are problematic. Very expensive to do more than once. A lot of times if you're an elected official and there's a number thrown in the air, this is what it's going to cost X, that's the number that sticks. Whether it's accurate or not, that is the number you will forever be stuck with as what this project is estimated to cost. And if those numbers have to be revised either up or down, it's tough to get over that. Decisions are often made on initial numbers. And, you know, if you're not self-provisioning, if you're a community and you're not going to be operating the network yourself, there are some more, I say hazards, but that's kind of, I didn't realize we're in hazard anyway, sorry. OpEx may not be accurate because I worked with a community out in Colorado that was a group of community anchor institutions that got together to construct and deploy and operate a network. They had a consultant do a feasibility plan for them, including a full business plan. Well, the full business plan included things like personnel, truck rolls, all of the things that you need to set up a business. Well, they had no intention of self-provisioning the network. Their intention was to hire a provider, a network operator, to do that for them. Well, that completely changes your OpEx. If you're starting from scratch, what is that going to cost you versus hiring a contractor that doesn't have those startup costs that can meld it into their business plan. And so that nice business plan just is now like an academic document. It just sits on a shelf. And when they were moving forward and setting up their entity, we had to do another business plan for them. The price point for services may not be enough for a provider. Now, this is another lesson learned from another community that did the business plan up front. Their intention was to always work with a provider. So they did the business plan, and then as part of the RFI that they issued to help find a provider, they told the potential bidders what the costs were going to be and what the service pricing should be. And so they said, well, you know, we've heard that it's $70 a month is the gold standard for gigabit speeds, so that's what we want in our community. And the bidders took one look at what their own capital expenses were, what their own business model was, and we can't do this for $70 a month. Not out here, it's rural, it doesn't work, this is not doable. And the town said, well, we're told that's what it should be. That's what Google says it should be. And so, you know, I don't think that project ever got off the ground. And so that's really an issue when you don't consult with the provider who's going to be your provider to do the business plan. You need to figure those things out first to make sure that your numbers are accurate. And the same thing with the equipment and provisioning services. It doesn't really do anyone any good to dictate what those should be when you're working with when your intention is to work with a provider. So, okay, so we've gotten through the feasibility, we've talked about demand survey, and all of these things are not directly financial, but now we've got down to the point where we're talking about ROI. So what goes into the business plan? And all of these things go into the business plan. And I'm a lawyer, I am not an accountant or a CPA, but this will be very familiar to you. The estimated market penetration, where does that come from? That comes from your demand survey information. Your capital expenditure, costs and depreciation, that comes from your engineering estimates. Your balance sheet, income statements, personal expense, operating expenses, and your financial schedule, these should all be thoroughly developed and put down on paper in a, ideally in a 10-year forecast. And, all of these things they may take a little bit of time to develop, but you want to make sure you get it right the first time. So, the last thing that goes into the business plan are funding and financing. If you are a municipality and money is falling from the sky and you can self-fund and finance your network, these are kind of the things that you're looking at, right? You're looking at bond funding, you're looking at possibly a tax assessment for the community. You're looking at general fund set-asides, moving money around between departments and contracts. And things like a buy-in fee, which you had in Ammon, Idaho. They're doing fiber to the home. In every home, they have the opportunity, homeowners, to buy onto the network. It's $3,000 per household to do so, which you can pay up front or over a 20-year period. You don't have to do that buy-in. You can say, I'm not interested in subscribing to the Ammon network. They have had, I can't remember what their take rates are, but they're pretty high, like over 60%, I think, right now. And I think they have multiple providers servicing the community there. So that's kind of a unique model where it's not really something that's being self-financed by the town, but it's being self-financed by the people. This is a video. It was just a short clip. It was a goofy little movie where it talks about, it's Danny DeVito, and basically the line is that the only thing he likes better than money is other people's money. And it's taken from a 1980s movie, ironically, about a Wall Street financier who takes over a cable company. So other people's money. This is the next set of options that you have looking in your financing plan when you're looking at your numbers and how you're going to fund your network. Loans, public-private partnerships, and grants. And, I think you have some great panels later on this afternoon that are going to be talking about the grants. And you have, in public-private partnerships is something that where the state of Kentucky is doing, where you have a shared risk, although the state is assuming more risk, I think, on some pieces of that. So those are all ways, things that you can look at as a municipality, as a provider as well. These are options for financing. And they're all, worth exploring for helping defray the costs. So for grants, I was going to joke and say that there's no funding here either, but there are some grant opportunities, and you have a panel on that. And so it has been that you have CAF 2, which was mentioned earlier. You have some USDA, BIP, you have loan programs. So there are some funding opportunities out there. So best practices in doing your financial plan. So the feasibility process is what you should do first to provide you with the go, no-go points before you do a business plan. So if you do your feasibility process and you've decided that, that $1.9 billion is just too much to swallow, then you don't need to spend the money on developing a business plan or going further. Or you might decide that it is, but really, if you do this feasibility process right, it'll save you down the road. And one other point is that when you are applying for grants and loans, you need to have a feasibility study. You need to have a full business plan and a feasibility study as part of that application. So in order to be ready, to be shovel ready, you have to have that all ready to go on your desk. And I think, the state of Kentucky talked about this, Philip talked about this. Be realistic in your timelines, both in the timeline for conducting the feasibility study and for executing your project. Because you will see RFPs out there that dictate the timeline, and they never work well. Estimates, oh, we can do this in 3 months, we can do this piece in 6 months, or, well, we've anticipated having this network up and running by the end of 2019, but, it took us 2 years to get to this point, and so be realistic in your timeframes of conducting your study and what you're asking your contractors to do. Spend money where you need to in developing your financial plan. Don't skimp on the demand survey. Make sure that you do this methodically and accurately, and an extra $10,000 here or there will pay off in dividends in the long run. Don't limit your options. There's a lot of talk about models. What model can we use if you're a municipality? What's out there? What can we do? Well, it's good to know what other people are doing, what other communities are doing, but that doesn't mean that that's all there is. So this is a world that's changing, it's shaping. There are new and exciting partnerships coming online every day that aren't hitting the news, and so just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean you can't do it. And commit to the project. If you're a municipality, it helps to have that political leadership that can stand behind you and say, the political will, this is what we're doing, this is what we need for our community, to have that champion. If you are a provider and you're easily scared off, you probably want to be in a different business. But this is something that you need to do, is to commit to the project and the process, and don't close down options. Just think to yourself, I really wish those municipalities would talk with us. Go talk with them. If you need help bridging that gap, find somebody that can help you with that. Don't give up. There's a lot of different ways that this cat can be skinned. With that, I will open it up for discussion and take questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Lori. That was great. Tell me what you think about crowdsourcing as a way to determine the demand. I know they're using a lot of or I see people using that today. And then I just wanted to comment on the Amon model that you mentioned in terms of that assessment that the house, I guess, the household makes. My understanding is that stays with the property.
It does.
So
Yep.
if I decide it's important for me to have a home-owned business and I pay the $3,000, I sell my house and my neighbor's house is on the market at the same time, I've already paid mine, it stays with it.
Correct.
And so that's a value of the property. It's sort of broadband ready, if you will.
Absolutely.
But crowdsourcing, tell us how that works.
So I think crowdsourcing is a great tool to use, not so much for doing your initial market demand survey, but for demand aggregation techniques and helping, when you're talking about developing cost-effective ways of deployment and you're looking at a community and you want to find out where the best fiber hoods are, if you want to, use the Google term, crowdsourcing can be effectively used to encourage neighborhood signups, for help engage interest in developing your deployment schedule. The crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing, Right. Well, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You know, crowdfunding is, you may all be familiar with Kickstarter, where you put a project up on there and basically the links go viral, hopefully, and then, millions of people donate to your Kickstarter fund. Crowdsourcing is a very similar technique where you put something out there and you promote folks to come to you to put in that information. Well, there's different ways to do that. I mean, if you're, I know Google, I think, went out and got $10 fee from neighborhoods as a commitment. You can do it with or without a fee. There's all these strategies that you can use, but really, crowdsourcing is generally just drawing people to your project and getting information out of it to be useful for you. Those are kind of other decisions that you can make to help make those. That's one way to do it. Yeah, I've seen it done with or without fees. Obviously, you feel like, if someone's giving you money, that they're going to follow through on their commitment to sign up with you, which, the theory behind that is that, well, if there's a year between getting a sign up and turning up that customer's house, that getting some kind of financial commitment back is, they put skin in the game, even if it's a nominal dollar amount, that will help keep them invested in the network.
Hello, Lori.
Hello.
It's working now. With regard to feasibility studies, a lot of our communities are kind of getting in and around that particular stage. And we've been attracting companies like Bees to Honey. We've had some folks coming through our area offering to do feasibility studies that are quite extensive and quite good. And then we've got some other guys. Not so much. So is there any word of advice with regard to process or planning that you could offer communities to kind of make sure they get a good feasibility study?
Yeah, that's so there's a lot of I've seen feasibility RFPs and reports done that range from everything that includes general information about over-the-top services and applications, and it's part of it is an academic paper and the value of broadband to a community, and then you have the other part of it where you have the financials and the stakeholder outreach. There's a lot of things that have gone into feasibility studies, and I would say that every community is a little bit different. You really want to make sure that you're getting a customized feasibility study for your community, that it's not something that's going to be spit out of someone's computer that has been 3/4 done already, and they're just sticking your name in there. You want to make sure that it's really customized and local to you. And how those studies come out, I'm working with a community in Colorado right now, and I told the Board of Supervisors, I said, whatever you think the conclusion is going to be, toss that out of your mind, because the whole reason we're doing this feasibility study is to get to that answer. So you want to make sure that that's the case, that there's not a cookie-cutter approach that comes in with a pre-done solution that doesn't really fit your community needs. And how you evaluate that when you're hiring consultants or you're working through the process is kind of for you to evaluate, but just know that really at the end of the day, what you want is you want to be able to answer those 3 questions. Should we do this? Can we do this? And how do we do this? You can do a feasibility study in 4 months, 3 to 4 months. That's a slightly aggressive schedule. If you're talking about including in their town meetings and council meetings and public hearings and things of that nature that may extend it a little bit. Generally, they can be completed within 4 to 6 months. That is a good question. So it depends on how much you put in there, and I'll give you a good example of this. So the town of Superior in Colorado, where I live, which is just outside of Boulder County, they were looking at doing a feasibility study. And they had a list of like 10 things that they wanted to put this feasibility to accomplish. They had a budget of, I don't know, $15,000, $20,000 to do it. And so we went in and met with them and said, you know, we don't have the same issues here that we do in a lot of mountain communities, because in my community you have CenturyLink and Comcast that have ubiquitous service to every home. So there's no access or issue. You know, you can get 250 meg easily in most households in our town. The question you need to answer is, can the town support another provider? Right. I mean, can you really justify a 10 plus $15 million fiber to the home underground build to get a third of the subscribers, to get maybe a maximum 30% take rate? So we told the town, like, you should start with a demand survey. And if the results of the demand survey come back that, yes, we can do it, then you should look at doing the rest of the feasibility, those tasks that you had. Usually feasibility studies, I think on average, are probably around $50,000, but it depends on what those scope of work are. I mean, there are times where you see a $250,000 scope of work in an RFP that isn't there, where the budget's not higher than $75,000. So you have to be realistic as well in what you're asking the consultants to bid on, making sure that, you know, they need to be able to make money too a little bit. And if you have a really exhaustive list of tasks, that is going to drive up the cost of your study. There's 12,000 people in my town. And by the way, they ignored our advice. They went ahead and hired a consultant for $60,000, and they've tabled it. It's sitting on the shelf. So they spent $60,000 they didn't have to.